with the scent of potpourri, films we commit to memory. Crossing the felt ropes, watching from home on my TV, looking at all my eyes can see. They tell me I view obsessively.
Hello and welcome to The Obsessive Viewer. We're a weekly podcast that reviews one or two new release titles every episode with an occasional free-for-all segment at the end that we call Potpourri. You can find more of our work, including my written reviews, full episode show notes, and the complete backlog of our episodes at obsessiveviewer.com. You can also write into the show by emailing me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. And if you'd like to support us and get access to hundreds of exclusive episodes, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer, where you can get access to content at any of our tier levels on a recurring monthly subscription basis, or you can buy individual collections a la carte in the Patreon shop section. Recently on Patreon, Patreon supporters got early access to my two special episodes that came out this week. My interviews with Michael Hussein and Kirsten Foe, those were both on Patreon early before their release, and they also got access to this episode a few days before it came out. So they get early access to that. I also did a bunch of Heartland Film Festival immediate reaction recordings over on Patreon. And this hasn't started yet, but screener season is just about upon us. And with my affiliation with the Indiana Film Journalists Association, I'm going to be inundated with tons and tons of award season screeners that I'll be watching in the run-up to awards voting for the IFJA awards. And as such, as I have been doing the last few years, I'm going to be doing Patreon Potpourri episodes where I'm going to be basically sharing my immediate reaction on all the movies I watched during award season. And they're going to be clumped together probably in groups of 4 like I usually do. And I'm going to just post those on Patreon. So Patreon over the next couple of months is going to be a treasure trove of movie reviews and immediate reactions. So check that out. If you have the means and you want to support the show, check out Patreon. You get tons of extra stuff. And once again, you can sign up at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer for all of that and a bunch more content. I'm your host, Matt Hurt, and you can find me on social media, including Letterboxd, at Obsessive Viewer. And later in the show, I'll be reviewing the new romantic horror film Your Monster, which is currently in theaters. But before that, I'm going to go over some movie news, and before reviewing Parker Finn's... I wrote that wrong. But before that, I'll be going over some movie news, and then I'll be reviewing Parker Finn's horror sequel, Smile 2, in this week's feature review. And usually I have one or two guests or a co-host on the show with me, but this week, due to time constraints and availability and all of that, I'm doing a solo episode, which I do on occasion. So even though it's just me this week, I would still like to highlight some recent work from some friends of the show. So bear with me for a moment as I run down some stuff that has been going on in some friends' corners in terms of movie criticism and film criticism, film journalism. Links to all of these pieces that I'm about to talk about will be in the show notes of this episode. And let me get started by talking about my friends over at MidwestFilmJournal.com. They just recently concluded No Sleep October, their yearly horror essay series. I was supposed to take part in that with a review of Martyrs, but unfortunately with things going on in my life, I could not participate this year, so unfortunate. But a couple of key essays to check out there is one from Nick Rogers. He did a rundown of the Silent Night, Deadly Night franchise, and Mitch Ringenberg did a rundown of the Wishmaster franchise for No Sleep October. And then for their other review or essay series that they've been doing, it's called Gimme Toro. It's a retrospective on Guillermo del Toro and some essays to highlight there. Again, links to all of these are in the show notes of the episode. Nick Rogers did an essay on Nightmare Alley, and Evan Dossie did an essay on Pappy McPoyle. It's his piece, it's Evan's piece about Del Toro's small but crucial cameos as Pappy McPoyle on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And of course, Sam Watermeyer wrote an essay on Blade 2, and Brent Leuthold wrote one for The Devil's Backbone. So check that out on MidwestFilmJournal.com. Elsewhere in the interwebs, over at Odd Trilogies at oddtrilogies.com. The guys Andy and Logan did an episode on Odd Trilogies podcast of the Odd Wolfman trilogy that covers 1941's The Wolfman, 1994's Wolf, and 2010's The Wolfman, so check that out. Alongside that, they also have written reviews. Andy wrote a review for Terrifier 3, and Logan wrote a review for Look Back, so check that out at oddtrilogies.com. And rounding out Friends of the Show's corner of this episode is Brent's work on awakenthedark.com. He wrote a review for Smile 2, Woman of the Hour, and Joker Folly Ado. Again, links to all of these pieces will be in the show notes of this episode. Go check out my friends' work and tell them Matt sent you. And then as I started last week and will continue to be doing this week, I also want to spotlight some stuff that's playing in Indianapolis Theaters here, just because we are still like it's the post Heartland film festival kind of like spirit that I'm in. I kind of want to just highlight some goings-ons at some non huge chain movie theaters. So once again, as mentioned last week, Alamo Drafthouse in Indy is going to be opening on Monday, November 18th, and they're still opening. They still have a contest for free movies for a year. So reading from their website, all you have to do is sign up for Alamo Victory, and you'll be automatically included or entered for a chance to win 2 invites to our opening night party, an Alamo Drafthouse swag bag, and a year-long subscription to Season Pass for 2 that entitles you to 1 free ticket per person to any regularly priced movie every day. Entries for that contest close on November 30th, so check it out. Link in the show notes of this episode. And I've got to say, I don't think I communicated it last week on the show, but I am very excited about Alamo Drafthouse, if only because I am excited to be in a theater where I don't need to be worried about people using their phones or talking. I'm very excited to experience that because anybody who's listened to more than 10 minutes of this podcast knows that one of my biggest pet peeves and biggest sources of annoyance is people disrupting my movie theater experience. And yeah, so I'm excited for Alamo Drafthouse for that reason. Elsewhere in Indy at the Can on November 1st, they're opening Anora, which I really am eager to watch. And also running from November 8th to November 14th is the Indianapolis LGBT Film Festival. So check that out at Can. And then over at the Living Room Theaters in the Bottleworks District by Mass Ave, opening this weekend is Amelia Perez Here and Let's Start a Cult. And opening next Friday on November 8th is Anora and Heretic. And then at Keystone Art, just right in my backyard, opening this weekend, they've got Anora and Amelia Perez, and they're also showing Goodrich and My Name is Alfred Hitchcock. And on November 5th, they're having a screening of Harold and Maude, so check that out at Keystone Art. And I'm almost done, I promise. So at Flicks Brewhouse in Carmel, this weekend, on November 2nd, that's the weekend, yes. November 2nd, they're showing The Matrix. November 3rd, they're showing JFK. And I believe that this is a Fathom Events thing, but November 3rd and the 6th, they are showing the 10th anniversary of John Wick. And then a little farther south of Indy at Historic Artcraft Theater in Franklin on November 1st, they're showing Thelma and Louise. And November 2nd, they're showing Escape from New York. And I don't have anything from Heartland Film Festival because they just concluded their film festival, but I did want to highlight Indie Film Fest. They currently have open screeners. So if you want to screen movies for consideration for Indie Film Fest, go check out their website and sign up to be a screener. So from their website, it says, we're looking for movie lovers like you to help us choose the films for the next Indie Film Fest. Screeners watch films submitted to us for consideration and fill out a small review for each one. Perks include swag up to free movie tickets and passes to our annual festival. And then they also on November 9th have an event that is part of their Serial Cinema series. Serial Cinema presents Anastasia. It is Saturday, November 9th at 10 a.m. at the Basel Theater at the historic Athenaeum. In partnership with the Athenaeum, Serial Cinema combines two of the best things about Saturday mornings: cereal and a great movie. Jesus. Tickets include cereal, coffee, and treats are available for purchase in the lobby. So that is the rundown of film stuff going on in Indianapolis. And let's get into the show, really. Before we get to the feature review tonight, I do have a couple of news before the reviews to talk about, one of which is a piece of news that I neglected to mention like last week or maybe even the week before. But Shudder officially announced VHS 8 for a 2025 release. It is a no-brainer. VHS has been thriving on the Shudder platform since Bloody Disgusting kind of revived it, and Shudder revived it really with VHS 94. And since then, there have been entries every year on Shudder. So there's not any other news. It's just basically at, I think it was New York Comic Con, they just announced that VHS 8 exists and is going to exist in 2025 on Shudder. So there's no word on what kind of, like, what the theme will be, if there is going to be a theme. No details have been presented, just VHS 8. I presume that that's going to be the finished title, but I don't know. It might be something else. But it is interesting that they just titled it VHS 8, since the last one was VHS Beyond, and previous to that was VHS 94, 99, 85. So it looks like if they stick with the VHS 8 title, they'll be kind of abandoning the themed element of the subtitles of it and going back to the original title schemes with VHS and VHS 2. So I don't know. For all I know, that could be a working title. We'll see, but I'm excited nonetheless. As I mentioned on the podcast before, I'm a fan of this type of movie, of this franchise, really. VHS is awesome. It's often a mixed bag. There's some good and bad in it. In just about every entry, but man, it's fun to have a yearly anthology horror franchise movie on streaming that I can look forward to each year, and I can look forward to having Brent on to review with me. So I am going to mark him down to be on for that, because he has been on the show to talk about really, I think, like the last three. The last three VHS movies, maybe the last four. I think it was just the last three, because I don't think I reviewed VHS, whatever it was, VHS 94, I think, or 99. I don't know. That's the one thing that kind of bothers me about the title scheme. Is that I don't know if 94 or 99 came first, but it was 99. So 99, or I'm sorry, no, it was VHS 94, VHS 99, then VHS 85. I know for a fact that Brent has been on for VHS 99, VHS 85, and VHS Beyond, and he will be on for VHS 8. Fingers crossed, I will put him on the list. So I'm excited about that. But also, something else that I'm excited about, this is a piece of news that I did not expect to come out of anywhere. Martin Lawrence and Sony are to reunite on a Blue Streak sequel. This piece of news is kind of delightful. I really liked Martin Lawrence in Bad Boys Ride or Die. I think he's a great comedic presence, and I really like the first Blue Streak movie. Blue Streak is a movie from 1999. It's a buddy comedy where Martin Lawrence plays a jewel thief who gets double crossed by someone on his crew and goes to jail, and he hides a diamond in a construction site. When he comes out of jail, that construction site has now become a police precinct, and he has to pretend to be a cop in order to get the diamond. It is such a fun buddy comedy. He plays off of Luke Wilson as this straight-laced detective guy so well. It is such a blast. It was one of those movies that it came out in 99, and like I would watch it on pay-per-view or on HBO, I guess, whenever it was on, because I had to, like, we were just we were basically just our viewing was dictated by schedules and everything. So I would watch it anytime it was on. It was a blast. I have a very soft spot for Blue Streak, and I rewatched it I think earlier this year for fun. And it holds up pretty well. It's pretty satisfying. It's pretty good. So I'm curious what a Blue Streak sequel will look like. I don't know if Luke Wilson will return. I don't know. There's no other details about it really, but I'm excited nonetheless. I hope that it is going to see the light of day, because I think it would be a fun kind of under the radar sort of sequel, really, because I don't know how big of a hit Blue Streak was. It kind of came out kind of at the height of Martin Lawrence's stardom, I think, but man, I'm excited about it. I think it could be a lot of fun. And buddy comedies are fun, so we'll see. That's really all of the news that I have. So let me go ahead and close out the news before the review segment. I don't have a stinger or anything for that, but let's go into the feature review this evening. Let's talk Smile 2. Okay, and for tonight's feature review, I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on Smile 2 in a non-spoiler and spoiler section. When I get to the spoiler section, I will play a clip from the trailer to divide up the spoiler section. Check the show notes for timestamps to navigate around spoilers and jump around the episode. Those show notes are available on your app or at obsessiveviewer.com/OV448. And so, yeah, let's get into the feature review. Of course, since this is a sequel, I'm going to go ahead and share my thoughts on Smile 1 from 2022 before I get into the feature review of Smile 2. So bear with me for a moment. We're almost to the feature review. Smile, the first one, came out in 2022. I reviewed it in, I think, episode like 396 of the Obsessive Viewer. I'm not sure. I don't have the information right in front of me, but I felt like it was a very effective horror movie. And revisiting it ahead of seeing Smile 2, I kind of just felt like it really held up pretty well. To a second viewing. I reviewed it in episode 386 of the Obsessive Viewer. So the first Smile came out in 2022. Basically, the premise is, after witnessing a bizarre traumatic incident involving a patient, a psychiatrist becomes increasingly convinced she is being threatened by an uncanny entity. That movie and the sequel were both written and directed by Parker Finn, who originally had created a short film that wasn't called Smile. It was called Laura Hasn't Slept, from that was in 2022, and starred Caitlin Stasey, who I believe played, did she reprise as Laura in the first Smile movie? I'm about to find that out. Yes, she did. So the first Smile movie, it's a very interesting movie. It's the type of horror movie that really like lives and breathes or lives and dies on its concept. If you don't buy into the concept, if you're not into the concept of this physical entity that latches itself onto someone and then torments them and torments their mental health, until it takes complete control over them, causing them to commit suicide in front of another person so that the parasite, the entity, can be passed on to someone else. If you don't like that concept, you're probably not going to like the movie. It does, on the surface, kind of feel slightly, I don't want to say derivative or anything, but it does feel a lot like It Follows by way of The Happening. And what I really appreciate about that first movie is it really does a great job of existing in, like, creating a full-length narrative of, like, this entity, this experience for Sosie Bacon's character. And what I also appreciate upon rewatch was the way that it deals with her mental health, her mental anguish, her past trauma, and the way that her mental health is brought into question throughout the movie. She plays a psychiatric doctor who deals with people with fragile mental states on a day-to-day basis. She's in the ER working with psychiatric patients. And what I really appreciate and enjoy about the first Smile movie is that it explores that in such an interesting way, in that she is experiencing these things, and because of her profession and because of like her education, her knowledge and everything, she doesn't get to the point where she truly can like believe in it. Like she still has this disbelief of it. And also people around her kind of just write her off a little bit, or write her off as crazy and not being able to deal with pressures and trauma that she experienced recently and her past trauma. So it's a really interesting way to just bring us into this world. Having a psychiatric doctor experience this as the protagonist in the first movie does double duty as kind of introducing us to the ins and outs and the rules of this universe, while also giving us a protagonist who knows the ins and outs of like mental health, to where she can rationalize it, she can explain or try to come to terms with what's going on with her, even though it's a supernatural thing. So all that's to say, I really enjoyed the first Smile movie. I rated it 3.5 stars. I actually bumped it up to 3.5 stars from 3 stars because I really, really enjoyed it on rewatch. Another thing that I really liked about it is the way that the movie utilizes some really great camera technique and sound design. It is just incredibly cold and disorienting. There's this like level of orchestra in the score that makes it just so unnerving and makes you feel like very a sense of unease. And there are so many examples of like Dutch angles and inverted frames where it puts you in this state of like, oh my God, like you're not in control of this. That's kind of the point of the whole movie, is like, you're not in control. And that is such a great way to kind of deliver that to the audience through visual and audio. And those are my kind of thoughts on Smile 1. Let me talk about Smile 2. Let's get to our featured review. Smile 2 is currently in theaters. It released in theaters and wide release on October 18th. The plot summary, courtesy of IMDb, is about to embark on a world tour. Global pop sensation Sky Riley begins experiencing increasingly terrifying and inexplicable events. Overwhelmed by the escalating horrors and the pressures of fame, Sky is forced to face her past. Writer and director for this movie was once again Parker Finn, and the cast includes Naomi Scott, Rosemary DeWitt, Lucas Gage, Miles Gutierrez Riley, Peter Jacobson, Ray Nicholson, Dylan Galula, and Raul Castillo, and Kyle Gallner reprising from the first movie. So, like I said, I'm going to do a non-spoiler review and then spoiler review. Because there are some really cool surprises and really cool, interesting things that happen that I can't talk about in a non-spoiler fashion. So let me go ahead and give my roundabout thoughts on Smile 2 in the non-spoiler section of this episode. So right from the outset, this movie is still about trauma, as is the case with countless other horror movies and everything. I think the horror genre, like it gets kind of a bad rep for being like kind of leaning into like traumatic storylines and stories about people dealing with trauma and through this horror vessel. I don't have a problem with that, because it lends itself so incredibly well to that kind of story. Like this genre, the horror genre is like kind of just built for that type of story. And if you get kind of a bug up your ass about like, oh, another movie about trauma, like, yeah, that's fair. Like you can be annoyed that it's a movie about trauma, but you should at least recognize if and when a horror movie that kind of deals with trauma in its own way does it in a unique way. And I think Smile 2 handles it pretty well, especially as a continuation of the first movie. Which I'll talk more about that in spoilers. But what I really like in kind of a more roundabout way is that the shift to a protagonist whose trauma in the movie is so public and so public facing is a very interesting way to expand upon what's already been established in the first movie and what's already been explored in the first movie. So with horror movies especially, but with movies in general, getting greenlit for a sequel, usually a lot of times there's just a beat for beat blueprint for how they're going to do the second movie. They're going to basically try to emulate the success of the first movie by sticking as close to it as possible. And the beauty of Smile 2 is that there's a certain sense of that in this movie. There's a certain element of that in this movie where it is kind of following a similar kind of trajectory, because from the outset, the blueprint of this movie is similar to the blueprint of the first Smile movie. Protagonist witnesses someone who is possessed by this entity kill themselves and now has a limited amount of time to grapple with their mental health and not succumb to the entity. Also, I just realized saying that out loud that it's also a mix of, so overall this franchise is a mix of The Happening, It Follows, and The Ring. So it's an interesting amalgam of those things. And what I think is a feather in Parker Finn's cap is that he's able to create something that is pretty unique, that stands out from those previous influences and sticks out as its own entity. Like, this is very much a fun, adrenaline fueled sort of tense experience. And you get what you know what you're getting into when you see one of these movies. It's just a pretty straightforward premise. Someone has experienced something, a supernatural entity, and trying not to kill themselves, trying not to be killed by it. That is a kind of universal horror, not universal horror, but a universal plot thread of this particular genre of film. And I just really like the way that Parker Finn plays in this sandbox that he's created. So, like I said in my roundabout way of talking about the first movie, this movie does such a great job of introducing a very different protagonist. This protagonist, Sky Riley, she is a pop star. She's an internationally famous pop star who experienced a traumatic event in a few years prior to this movie. Basically, she was in a car accident with her famous boyfriend, and he died, and she survived. But she has back pain now. She's still dealing with that experience, and also dealing with the experience of being this world-renowned pop star, being this person who is constantly being looked upon and being just constantly has eyes on her. And that, on paper, is such an interesting escalation of the plot of the first movie, and an interesting escalation of this universe, because you have, in the first movie, Sosie Bacon is basically just she's kind of on her own. She's a little bit alone. She's a little bit agitated by the people in her life, especially her sister and her brother-in-law, because of tension about their family home that their mother had died in. And there's this whole isolating aspect to Sosie Bacon's character in the first movie, where she doesn't have really anyone to turn to. And Sky Riley, in contrast, in this movie, she's got so many people to turn to. She has so many people around her. But since she is this international pop star, since she's this person who is the backbone of a multi-million-dollar industry and multi-million-dollar brand, the people that she has in her life are not people that are, able to put her interests forward. So throughout the movie, she's preparing for a world tour that is going to be her comeback tour after a horrible event that happened. After everything that's happened to her, she's going to come back and she's going to do a world tour. It's going to be great. And then she gets the monster and she has to kind of deal with that. But what I loved about this is that there is such an interesting level of a sense of scale that is so much bigger than the first one. Because like I said, Sosie Bacon's character is isolated. She has her relationship with her ex-husband or ex-boyfriend and her relationship with her fiance. And that's basically it. And I will say, just to point out, the scene, I will say, as much as I enjoyed Smile 2, to spoil my rating, I rated it 4 stars. I really liked it. I rated it half a star higher than Smile 1. Honestly, I think I enjoyed the movie overall more than Smile 1. But nothing in Smile 2 is as good to me as the birthday present scene in Smile 1. Just like that is just such a traumatic event and traumatic moment in that movie that I thought was incredibly, just really, really well executed. And there are plenty of things in Smile 2 that are executed like incredibly well as well, but nothing as memorable to me, I think, as that scene in Smile 1. But like I said, there is a ton of just upping the stakes, upping the scale for this movie. Just from the environments that are kind of utilized in this movie, as well as like it also taking place like in the heart of like New York City. So like when you have those like Dutch angles and like the inverted frames, we're not just doing that on the exteriors of a hospital or in a hospital room or anything like that. We're seeing Manhattan kind of inverted, and we're seeing the camera float through the skyline of Manhattan and go into the apartment building where Sky Riley lives alone by herself and is downing these waters and everything. I was going to make the joke that not since The Faculty have I seen a horror movie be so promotional of hydration than now. Like this is the most I've seen of that since The Faculty. But it's really interesting the way that that's utilized, the way that that's explained away. Like it's kind of it's done in a way that like she says that, you know, she's in recovery for substance abuse, and her sponsor and her therapist, her people are telling her that like anytime you feel the urge to use or to do something self-destructive, drink an entire glass of water. So she is constantly in possession of these just giant like water bottles, like the Voss water bottles that look very fancy and everything because she's a pop star, and she's downing them throughout the movie. And I read in the trivia that she actually that it was not CGI. She's actually like really drinking the entire bottles, which is really cool. Really good. It really made me thirsty, honestly, much like The Faculty. But I was gonna make that joke, but then the movie pointed out that it's because of her recovery, so it makes sense. But that also leads to some interesting things. If I remember, I'll bring that up in the spoiler section. But yeah, so we get these like inverted frames, we get these Dutch angles that are taking place like in New York City. Like we're seeing this giant city like turned upside down, basically. And I think that is a good visual way to build up the scale of things from the first movie. And in conjunction with that, the sound design is just as great. Like the score is incredible. It's also infused with pop songs and pop music that is from the character of Sky Riley. So like there's actually like a couple of like not full length like music breaks where she's performing, but there are music cues and there are scenes where she is performing music. And in the realm of like the movie, like we have this tension that it's scary because we know what's attached her, what has attached itself to her. So when she's doing these performances, when she's doing these rehearsals and dances and stuff, we get like a sense of tension. And also, like, the choreography is really good in that, like, we have a scene early on where she is rehearsing a musical number for one of her songs. And, like, the lyrics are great, too, because it's like, I need a new brain. And it's just, like, it's so in keeping with what that character is going through, because she is someone who is, you know, healing. And she's on a healing journey and is about to kind of come back into the world. Little does she know she's about to be possessed by an evil entity. But even in like that rehearsal space, it's like a rehearsal space. It's not on a stage, but she's like, they're doing the dance moves. They're doing the routine. And like, it's not a situation where like the entity is like factoring into this movie yet, but it's just her residual pain from the car accident is flaring up. And you get a great sense of like where she is mentally, that she needs to do this. She needs to be back into the swing of things. She needs to be back to normal. Otherwise she's going to just, you know, drown in this pain that she's suffering throughout her history. And another great thing about that, is that also is great characterization for her, specifically because we don't know the extent of like the car accident. We don't know the details of her relationship with with the guy who died in it, who was played by Jack Nicholson's son. Paul Hudson. Paul Hudson is the character's name, played by Ray Nicholson. So we don't know the extent of that relationship. We don't know the like what led to the accident. We don't know what the nature of that relationship was. And I kind of love that a little bit, because we get like our introduction to like the fact that she suffered, like she was in a car accident previous to the run of the movie, is that she is like, she's overhearing like a news piece online or on the news that's talking about like, oh, she's about to like basically delivering us the exposition. But I love that that's our kind of window into the relationship between her and Paul. And that's a relationship that is going to be haunting her throughout the movie, because it ended so horrifically and has factored into her life. But I love that we as the audience are getting the introduction of that backstory through the news, through the way that her audience in the movie gets the news, through like the knowledge that they have of the relationship is the same type of knowledge that we're gaining out of the movie about the relationship. So I just really liked that as a little flair thing. So once the entity kind of takes charge, that like it's gruesome. Like there's some really gruesome stuff in the first movie, but man, this movie just amplifies that so much. Like if you've seen the trailer, you've seen the scene where the guy takes the like big weight, oh my God, I don't know what it's called, like that you put on the bench, on a bench press, the weight, the gym weight, and smashes his face with it. It is gruesome. It's disgusting. And there are several sequences that are just like very, very grim and gruesome, and unsettling. But also those are working in tandem with the aforementioned like camera work and the sound design, the score, the moody score that's really amping up the atmosphere. But also we're getting some really cool moments of mental just disorientation for Skye throughout the movie. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail about that in spoilers, but basically the way that the movie is like explores her deteriorating mental state throughout the movie has such a refreshing sense to it, compared to the first movie, because she doesn't have that background. She doesn't have that background as a doctor to where she can figure out or self-diagnose or try to figure out what's going on in a medical capacity. She's just not really sure what's going on. She's hallucinating. She's seeing these things. She's being tormented by these things, and she doesn't know how to rationalize that, or she can't rationalize that. And to further kind of expound upon that, the people around her are people that are around her because she is the engine of a multi-million-dollar brand. And so when she is exhibiting these horrible like mental health breaks, they are resistant to the idea of like canceling the tour or postponing the tour or getting her to a point where she can be, safe. Instead, it's more like, well, we need to do this. You need to go to this fundraiser because you gave this person your word that you would be there, and you can't do that because the media will destroy you. You have to see this tour through, because if this is your second chance, and if you cancel it, there's no more second chances or anything. Like the stakes to them are so high because it's their livelihood and their kind of, their livelihood, really, their fame, to the point where it's irrelevant whether or not Skye is safe mentally or physically. And that is such an interesting kind of commentary on celebrity and celebrity culture and building a brand and putting that brand on the back of a single individual who is going to have their mental health deteriorating immediately from that pressure and from all of those instances. So it's some interesting commentary there. But in addition to that, there's some really interesting like non-entity stuff. So there's one scene where Skye is signing autographs at a fan event, and this one fan comes up. He's kind of an older guy, and he's got like, the makeup design is incredible. At least I hope it was makeup design, and I hope if it wasn't, I hope I'm not being offensive, but it's gross. It's grotesque. Like, he has like these sores on his face, and he goes up to her and he says like, "Hey, I'm like, will you sign this for me?" And then it turns into a stalker situation. Like, that has nothing to do with the entity, has nothing to do with Smile or anything. It's just, he's an unhinged individual. And like, there's one line that just made my skin crawl, and that's a pun that I intended, that I won't give it away, but like, just when he is talking to her and that scene is escalating and that tension is rising, and we're all noticing that, okay, this is taking a turn down into like Dangerville for her. Two things are occurring simultaneously in that. One is that we are recognizing that this man is a danger to her, and the way that he is describing her and describing how he wants to be with her is disturbing. And especially that one line that I won't give away, it's just so, it makes my skin crawl. But the other side of that is, she's already kind of come in contact with the entity. So like, we don't know if this is real or not. We don't know if this is a situation where the entity is trying to just mess with her, or is trying to rattle her, or if this is a real individual that is a threat to her. And I think that the combination of that is a really great example of this movie really shying away from repeating itself from the first movie, and doing something new and unique with its story and with this particular character in this particular setting. And it makes me excited at the prospect of maybe more of these movies. I don't know how you do that. I don't know how long this premise can sustain itself, because it is, all told, it is pretty similar. Like, it is a similar blueprint of it. Like, there's not much necessarily that is expanding upon like the lore of the entity or the lore of what's going on. It's just, it's basically taking the same principles of the first movie and applying them to a different world, a different context for a person that's in danger of this entity and everything. So it's just really interesting how it's doing that, doing the work to kind of free itself from the first movie while still being kind of dependent upon the lore established in the first movie. And another way that it kind of utilizes a different track for the movie this time around is, there is a character, and I'll expand upon this in spoilers, but there's a character that pops up who has kind of a possible solution for Sky's problem. And what I appreciate about this is that this movie doesn't just repeat the ideas of the first movie in terms of being like in the first movie, like they set up an idea like, okay, you have to do this in order to escape this. And then they try that. It's not like this new thing that comes up in this movie is not something that was tried in the first movie. So I appreciate that difference there. And again, I will probably expand on that in spoilers a little bit. But basically what I will say is that I appreciate that this new possible solution that comes up is furthering the lore and furthering the possibilities of freeing someone of this entity, and is something different from the first movie. But the actual idea itself feels a little bit tired. It feels a little bit like it's something that I've seen done several times in several movies. So I don't know. It just felt a little bit like, okay, well, yeah, it does track within the ideas presented in like the rules of the Smile universe. It does work within that, but it also is something that is well-trodden territory in the horror genre. So it kind of just seems like, okay, yeah, like, I don't know. But the kind of resolution of that is ultimately really satisfying. So, and as is the resolution of everything in this movie. Like, I really appreciated it. I really enjoyed it more than the first one. Again, there's not really a scene that reaches the level of just traumatic like horror as the birthday present scene in the first movie. Like, that is just such a, like, when I was rewatching the first movie, I kept seeing the thing that is the subject of that birthday present scene. And I kept thinking, like, I couldn't remember like how that resolved itself, but I knew like, okay, well, they're paying a lot of attention to this creature in this movie, so something is going to happen, but I can't remember what it was. I couldn't remember if it was just a red herring or if it was something that happened. And then like 2 scenes before what happens, I was just like, I remember now. Okay, this is going to traumatize me all over again. So I really like that. So there isn't anything that's as like traumatizing and traumatic and horrifying in this movie on that visceral level. There is one thing that comes close to it where she's at a banquet event and the entity kind of messes with her mind with the teleprompter. So she's supposed to speak, and then like it's supposed to be an easy gig, but she's very frazzled by the events that have been happening. And then the teleprompter stops, and then she has like a freak out moment basically in front of a crowd of people. The end of that scene is very effective in terms of just gasp inducing scare tactics, similar to that traumatizing birthday present scene in the first movie, but it doesn't have the impact of that. It doesn't have the same like big scope impact of that scene from the first movie. So that's one area where this movie attempts something interesting but falls just a little bit short of it. But overall, like this movie is a very worthy continuation of the first movie, expansion of the first movie. And I've been talking around a lot of stuff, so I'm going to go ahead and transition over to spoilers here in a moment. But just to reiterate, I rated Smile 2 4 stars out of 5 on Letterboxd. It's phenomenal. I was really pretty taken with it. And before I get to the spoiler section, I do have just a little, like, this is the problem with doing a solo episode, because I don't have anyone to rein me in, but I do have a slight rant about Letterboxd that I just want to get off my chest. And it's just, it's very much a bummer to me. So before I get into spoilers, you can skip ahead if you want to avoid this just stupid thing that I'm about to do. But, before I get into spoilers, there is a problem in the Letterboxd community that it bums me out, because I love Letterboxd. We have championed this site for years. It has changed the way that I like watch movies, the way that I log movies, because like logging movies is stuff that we have done here at the Obsessive Viewer. We've done before the Obsessive Viewer was a thing. Like Tiny and I and Mike, the 3 of us were keeping track of our movies watched since like 2007. And like we had basically like notebooks, and we had like notes on our phones, and just keeping track of everything. I would take New Year's Day off, or I would spend New Year's Day basically at like Starbucks, just compiling all of my data into a single Word document that ran like 17 pages for the year, and calculating all of my stats and everything. This is stuff we were doing manually. So Letterboxd does and will always have a special part in a special place in my heart. But there is something that I think is indicative of the internet as a whole, and it's annoying. It's so freaking annoying. So what I use Letterboxd for, as, you know, an older millennial guy, is I like to log my movies, and I like to share some thoughts about the movies I watch. I will run the gamut of taking 5 minutes to say a few sentences, or I'll take 20 minutes to craft like a short essay that's basically just like a hair short of what I would write on the website, with my thoughts and kind of calculating my thoughts and figuring out my thoughts on the movie. Those reviews don't get a lot of traction on Letterboxd, but the reviews that do, over the last couple of years, I think maybe as Letterboxd has grown and become more popular, there is a level of shit posting on Letterboxd that I can't abide. I hate it with the fury of 1,000 suns. So I'm going to read 6 of the most popular reviews on Letterboxd for Smile 2, and I will share how many likes those reviews get. And I hope that it communicates how much I hate it, because I put, like, it's not so much that I put a lot of work into it or anything, but it's just like the community of Letterboxd needs to be better. Like, it just needs to be better. I hate this. So the top review on Smile 2 on Letterboxd is, "This happens when you don't thank Beyonce." That's it. That's the whole review. 7,387 likes. The next one, "Lady Raven and Sky Riley Cunty World Tour when?" 5,825 likes. And this next one is maybe a little unfair because she is a YouTuber who has like a YouTube channel and is vastly more popular than anything I do here, and has a link to her YouTube review of it in this review. But her review says, "Naomi Scott is so good in this, but the most impressive part was how she was continuously just downing entire bottles of Voss water like a fucking champ." 5,505 likes. And then the last three I'm going to read. "Chat, I think this is sponsored by Voss. I don't know." 3,970 likes. "This is going to ruin the tour." 3,684 likes. "Who wants to live that badly?" 3,251 likes. I'm just going to let that linger there for a little bit. Like, am I wrong? Is that not like just incredibly annoying? I don't know. And here's my Smile 2 review. "This was such a cool expansion on the first movie. I love that Parker Finn found a way to tell a different kind of story within the world he's building while also building upon the first movie. It's an interesting, almost inversion of the first movie to have the protagonist of Smile 2 a super famous pop star. The first film was a doctor whose sanity was constantly questioned. Now we have a pop star who generates millions upon millions of dollars for the people around her. So when her sanity is tortured by the entity, people turn a blind eye. Really good stuff. More thoughts to come later this week on the Obsessive Viewer podcast." 4 likes. 4 likes, guys. So follow me on Letterboxd. Username is @ObsessiveViewer. And Jesus Christ. So anyway, that's my rant. Let me go ahead and go into spoilers for Smile 2. If you want to avoid this and go to my review of Your Monster, check the show notes for timestamps. And those show notes, again, are at obsessiveviewer.com/OV448. So now, without further ado, let me go into spoilers for Smile 2.
I need you to listen to me. Something really bad happened. You remember Louis Fergoli? From high school? I went to his apartment. But when I showed up... Louis?
No, get away from me! What?
He was smiling at me.
All right, so spoilers on for Smile 2, and I've got a few things I want to talk about here. A handful of things I want to talk about to hit on in the spoiler section. First and foremost, the beginning of the movie, the whole prologue of the movie with Joel trying to break free of the entity is incredible. So the first movie has this interesting sequence with Laura, like the introductory sequence of Laura, which I presume to be basically the feature-length movie's equivalent of the short film in the movie. That's what I assume that the Laura scene in the Smile 1 is kind of doing in that. What the prologue in Smile 2 does is it feels like this short film. It feels like a short film that is just, it is disturbing. It's so fucked up, you guys. It's incredible. It feels like its own self-contained short film. And I love that we don't get like any, like, I don't think we got like any like opening credits or anything. We just got like, it just goes right to him. And like, we don't even get any backdrop. We don't get any backstory about the first movie, no recap or anything. All it says is 6 days later. And I freaking love that as this continuation, because the nature of this entity, the supernatural entity in these movies, is it is a chain. It is a chain that cannot be broken, or can and fails to be broken along each installment. And just to open it up with just like the confidence of like, yes, our first movie was very successful. Everyone knows when you're going to Smile 2, you know, like people are going to be watching Smile 1. We don't need to do this big recap to try to get more butts in the seats, to get more positive reactions, because we're confident of this movie. So we're going to open it with just 6 days later. We don't even need a recap of what happened in the first movie. You know who this character is, what this character has gone through, and you can infer what he has been doing these last 6 days and what he is about to do to try to break this chain. And from there, we get these incredible moments where it's like this POV shot, like over the shoulder. I don't think there are much POV shots in that. I forgot to mention, in the non-spoiler section, that there's some really cool like POV shots in this movie, namely when Skye is with Lewis, right after he commits suicide. Skye looks at his body and like the camera goes into her POV and moves, and like before you get to like his face, she turns away and the camera jerks away. And like, I just love that immersion into the character. I mean, because you got that, and again, the aforementioned like Dutch angles and the sound design, the score are all working to create this incredibly immersive experience. And that's the kind of horror that thrives with me. I love that. And that is indicative or is instrumental in the effectiveness of the opening scene of this movie with the prologue with Joel. You know what he's doing because we know from the first movie that the idea is that in order to break the chain, you have to kill someone. You have to kill someone in front of someone else that will pass the entity onto another human being. That will pass them on to someone else, and then it'll basically skip over you. It's kind of like a Final Destination sort of thing, as well. So, we know that that's what Joel is going to try to do. But we also know that we're in Smile 2. Like, it's not going to be a thing. I will admit, I thought, oh my God, so, like, are they going to do a thing where, like, I really thought that maybe Kyle Gallner was going to be have a bigger role in the movie, naively as that sounds, because I kind of assumed that he was going to succeed in that, and then the entity was going to go on to Lewis, and then eventually Kyle Gallner would have to come back and reckon with what he did, and then do like a big hero's sacrifice thing to try to save Skye or whatever. But that's not what this movie does. And holy shit, this movie's awesome at this prologue is incredible because he does it. He kills someone in front of someone. And I love the kind of like just the very cop-like way that he like explains, like, you guys murdered a mother and her daughter, or a mother and her kid, in cold blood. So you deserve to die and everything. But then he messes it up and kills the guy that he's supposed to pass it on to. And that's how it gets to Lewis. I just love that. I love that. And I love this like guerrilla style filmmaking, this over the shoulder, kind of just like handheld camera technique as he's running through the house to try to evade the other gangsters or whoever that are coming after him. And then I love the way that it ends. It ends with like the shot that was in the trailer, and I just didn't even think about it. He is just mowed down by a truck as he's crossing the street, and then that's when we get that's when we get the opening credits, because it pans out and you see that the blood smear that has like his limbs severed limbs all over the place, his intestines just strewn about. It's in the shape of a freaking smiley face, and it is awesome. It is so awesome. It's so cool. I thought that was such a great way to bring us in to the sequel with that prologue. It's just so damn good. Yeah, incredibly effective. I love that as this kind of just like self-contained short film, kind of similar to the cold opens in Scream and countless other horror movies. Like, I just love this like opening sequence. I think it's great. So, to get into other parts of the story, Gemma as a character, this movie really plays up this level of, not being sure what what is reality? Like this lack of reality, it really plays that up on a bigger level than the first movie. And I kind of love this movie for that, because Gemma, as a character, being a childhood friend that Skye has had a falling out with a year previous, we don't know the extent of it. We just see the text messages that Gemma calls her a toxic friend and not being a good person. And then Skye kind of doubling down on that and screaming at her via text. Like we can infer like what the big falling out was, and how much the movie is kind of like playing at this idea that Skye is someone who is a drain on other people, has used other people, and is only focused on herself. And the growth that she has throughout the movie is pretty good, because like she eventually gets to the point where she's like, no one else can, I'm not going to let this thing hurt anyone else in my life. I'm not going to let anyone else get hurt by this. Even if it means that I need to die, I don't want anyone else to get hurt. And Gemma is kind of like this person that's kind of supposed to be like the kind of, I don't know, tether to reality for Skye, and tether to like her pre-fame days, because she's a childhood friend. And we get those scenes with Gemma like coming to the rescue, coming over to Skye's apartment, and then having like burying the hatchet and talking and staying the night, and like all of these like good bonding moments. And then you get the other scenes where it's like, you know, Skye is asking her if she can stick around for the tour and everything. And then Gemma's like, well, I can't do that because, you know, I can't just uproot my life and everything. I have stuff going on. That's all great. And then it leads to what is one of those twists in a horror movie where I think like, wow, I am such an idiot for not even really considering this. But like the movie playing with the Skye's sense of reality is so great, because I didn't even really consider that Gemma was just an entity, just a part of the entity, was like a hallucination. The movie disguises that so well, because like when Skye's mother comes over, that the morning when she's late, and Gemma just kind of says like, hey, what's up? Like, it's exactly what you need. It's all you need to kind of bury that twist at the end. And I just loved how that becomes like such a shock moment, because it's not necessarily because like Gemma as like the entity wearing Gemma basically isn't something that's been orchestrating things. It's not a situation where the puppet strings are being moved or anything. Instead, when we get the reveal that Gemma's not real, and that Skye has just like the entity has been making Skye hallucinate Gemma, the reaction that the Gemma thing has is to smile and say, everyone hates you and nobody likes you and you have no one. Like, that is just horrific. Absolutely horrific on a different level. And it really brings home, especially in that moment being at the end of the movie, brings home Skye's sense of self-doubt and her insecurities and all of that. I thought that was a really well executed scene. And I know I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but I do want to kind of circle back and talk about Morris as a character. He's a character that pops up who reveals himself to be someone who believes that the entity exists because his brother was in the chain, like 8 people behind Skye, and he's been tracking it down. He's been trying to figure out, and he wants to put an end to it. So like I said in the non-spoiler section, I do like that this is a different idea. Like, it's a different idea in the sense that Morris has a different idea of how to stop it. Like, the idea is to stop Skye's heart for a couple of minutes, to basically have the entity skip over her because she's technically dead. It's a far-fetched idea, but it is a different idea than killing someone in front of someone else so that they can pass on the demon on to someone else. So I really like the variety of that. I really like the difference, the different style of solution that's presented in this movie. What I don't like is it feels derivative. It feels like it's Flatliners. Flatliners is a movie that had a remake and is fairly popular. I've never seen them, but they're very popular, and that's the plot of Flatliners. But I also feel like that's come up in a couple of different movies over the last few years. Like I know Fear Street did that, Netflix's Fear Street a few years ago. And there was one other movie I can't think of, maybe like Tarot or one of those other like Blumhouse PG-13 horror movies. But regardless, it feels like a really tired idea. And so I hope that if there is a Smile 3, if the franchise continues, I do hope that there's a little bit more variety in like the plans that are made to try to break the chain. But having said that, it's kind of a moot point because it doesn't happen. Like, this movie ends in such a way. Like, this is such a cool movie. The way that it leads to the ending, I loved it. I don't know how other people felt about it because the most popular reviews on Letterboxd are just shit posting stupid one-liners. But but the reveal at the end that like the last like act of the movie was all fake, and that she was just about to take the stage is so great. And let me back up a little bit because I will say I misspoke now that I'm thinking about it out loud. So, okay, now I'm thinking about it out loud. Whatever. So, now that I'm thinking about it, there is a sequence that matches the trauma-inducing horror of the dead cat in the birthday present scene in the first movie, and that is the scene where Skye, quote unquote, murders her mother in the hospital room. That was such an incredible sequence because it's like it's double and tripling down and tripling down on like what's reality and what's not reality. It's something that is basically going from, okay, we think that we're watching the entity take control of her mother and make her kill herself in front of her. And then we see the shard of glass being in her hand, and she has the realization that she did it. And then she also has a realization that she needs to escape because she needs to get out of there because her dead mother is in the room and she needs to get out of there to evade capture so she can get rid of this entity and everything. And like the way that she does that, like taking the gun and firing it in the room or in the hallway, lobby area, and then running out is so great. And it's just so, it's so cool because like we get that as the energy of that explores like the whole energy of the finale. Like this is the climax of the movie at this point, and we're like in it. It's like it's high octane, it's adrenaline rush. We're driving through the city with fake Gemma, and she's trying to get Skye to Staten Island to meet Morris to basically kill herself for a minute so that she can get rid of the entity. That is enough plot to be the climactic moment of the movie. But then when we get the reveal that it's all fake and it's not real and she's driving alone, she's by herself and she's going there, like that just like that twists things around in such an interesting way that when we get to the freezer room in the abandoned Pizza Hut where Morris is strapping her down to try to like in getting her to get the injection and everything, like we don't know what's real, we don't know what's not, we don't know what is about to happen. And I love that so much because I felt like I was on the edge of my seat throughout that entire sequence, especially with like the little like kind of I guess red herring thing where Morris is just like, well, we need to keep the door propped open because the latch doesn't work on the inside. And like, now that I'm saying it, I don't even know if Morris was even there. Because when she's attacking the entity, she says like, it's not like none of this is real. Like it's just led her there. And I think that makes sense, I guess. But I kept thinking like another possible way that it could have resolved itself would be that Morris could have just locked her in the freezer, and just kept her there until Skye dies and the entity dies with her. And Like, that would have been an effective ending. Like, I was rooting for that to happen because I just thought, like, man, that would be pretty cool. That would be a good way to kind of resolve everything, in a dark ending. But that's not the case. And I also was kind of wondering, like, are we going to get like a Shyamalan-esque twist where it's like maybe Morris was actually, like, maybe there's another entity that is also taking over Morris, and like, is this his plan that he's luring her into this scenario so that he can free himself from the entity? Whatever. None of that panned out, but I think that there's a lot of room to grow and explore in this franchise and in those kinds of interesting ways, especially with the way that this movie ends, which I'll talk about in a moment. But there was something else I was going to talk about beforehand, not about the mother, not about something else. I can't remember. But anyway, man, that's going to bug me. I had it right there and now it's gone. So I apologize. But I will say that the ending that we get is so like chilling and disturbing, but it's also like, it is the ending that we want. It is the ending that people go into this movie expecting, whether they're conscious of expecting it or whether it's just something that's in the deep recesses of their mind. But the idea of a mega superstar pop star getting this like parasitic entity in her brain that is fostered by like increasing mental health issues and mental like situations there, like just completely discombobulating mental stuff. The conclusion of the movie, the actual like conclusion of the movie was always going to be that she is going to do the entity is going to cause her to commit suicide on stage. Like, that is such an incredible sequence. And like, it's shot so great. I loved it. I loved it. And it has my brain kind of running around in circles trying to, like, I'm wondering, like, because she did that in front of an entire audience, which I do kind of feel like maybe the budget was like, that's the limitations of the budget. I feel like Parker Finn was able to get the budget to get some really cool, interesting stuff throughout the movie. But then when we get the big stadium arena thing, it's like 20% full. Like it is a much smaller venue than you would expect it to be. Not that I'm complaining or anything, but I just thought that was kind of funny that, like, in the year that we have Trap, which has like a massive like set of a massive arena stadium performance, like it's the smallness of this group at the end of Smile 2 kind of sticks out a little bit too much for me. But it makes me wonder, since she did that on stage in front of tons of people, does that mean they're all infected with it? And is there going to be an outbreak of sorts, or is it just going to be one person in the audience? And I think that there's an argument to be made for both. Obviously, there's an argument to be made. I think that if there is going to be more movies in this franchise, obviously, I think that it would have to be, a single person in the audience experiencing it and kind of following the trend of the first two movies. But I think if, for whatever reason, if they don't make a third Smile movie, if this is the end of the franchise, I think that this as a duology is really cool, very provocative and very interesting. And it leaves you thinking that, maybe everyone in there will be possessed by this entity, this demon thing. And then it'll cause a rash of thousands upon thousands upon thousands of suicides and death and destruction and despair and the end of humanity, all of this stuff. I think that it's such a bleak ending. But let me talk about the end scene exactly in specifics, though, because it works like gangbusters. Having her turn her face to the crowd, like, first of all, her freaking out and then the entity taking her over. We get that just wide shot of her staring at the entity, like just in fully on stage. We know that this is the end. This is the money shot of that. It's disgusting. It's disturbing. It's so messed up. And then we see the audience's reaction to her being just like her being catatonic or having a seizure on the stage when we know that the entity is taking control of her completely. And then I love, she stands up and she doesn't face the crowd. And we only see her back, and we see her back on the monitors, the big like Jumbotron, like the big screens behind her. We only see her back because that's where the cameras are. And then she turns around and we see the smile. And then the brilliance of that is then we get a static shot of the audience while she kills herself with the microphone, bludgeoning herself, throw it like in her eye socket. We only see the audience's reaction. I thought that was so cool, so provocative, so crazy. And then we also get the shot of her with the microphone in her eye. It's just, it's such a great ending. I loved it. I loved the end of this movie. I absolutely did. Yeah, and I wish I could remember what the other thing I was going to bring up was, but oh well. I think that's about all I've got to say about Smile 2. Once again, I rated it 4 stars on Letterboxd. And it's in theaters now. I put in my notes, it was in 2025. No, 2024. I was very tired when I wrote my notes. So those are my thoughts on Smile 2. Let me know what you thought. You can email me, matt@obsessiveviewer.com. Reach me on socials. If you're listening to this and you know of a way to reach me that way. Let me know what you thought about Smile 2. And that's it for the feature review for this week's episode of the Obsessive Viewer podcast. And let's go ahead and go into our secondary review of the evening. And of course, before we get to our secondary review, I want to take a quick moment to remind you that if you like the show, please take a moment to follow us on social media and subscribe to and rate the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or whatever your preferred podcast app is. And don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Obsessive Viewer Podcasts as well, where I'm posting more videos and live streams of podcasts here and there. And if you're interested in starting a podcast of your own, and you can go to Libsyn and use promo code OBSESS. When you sign up for a new account, you'll get up to 2 months free, depending on when you sign up during the month, and we'll get a commission on it as well. More details on that are in the show notes of this episode, and now back to the show.
They tell me I view obsessively.
Target for Laura Franco.
Do you mind if I really need a hug right now.
I don't know if I'm...
I really needed this.
He broke up with me.
And now my life is over.
I know it sucks. Eat some pie,
I'm disgusting.
sleep, and don't cry. Don't cry.
Hello?
What's up?
All right, and on this week's secondary review, I'm sharing my thoughts on Your Monster, which is in theaters now. It was released in theaters on October 25th, and the premise, according to IMDb, is after her life falls apart, soft-spoken actress Laura Franco finds her voice again when she meets a terrifying yet weirdly charming monster living in her closet. A romantic comedy horror film about falling in love with your inner rage. Your Monster was written and directed by Carolyn Lindy. This is her featured directorial debut, I believe, and the movie was based on a short film of the same name from 2020 that she wrote and directed that also had Tommy Dewey as the monster. And speaking of the cast includes Melissa Barrera, Tommy Dewey, Edmund Donovan, Megan Fahey, Lena Young, Brandon Victor Dixon, and Kayla Foster. So, Your Monster. I wasn't crazy about it, to be honest. I thought it was just okay. I'm going to do a non-spoiler review here. It's pretty fresh in my mind because I just finished watching it shortly before recording this, but it's kind of interesting because this is vaguely interesting. It's not really that interesting, but I went to the theater to see it a couple of nights ago, but I kind of had a panic attack and had to leave the theater. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to see it in the theater like properly, but I did have a screener of it, and so I watched it that way today, with no panic attack, which was great. So I'm a big fan of Melissa Barrera, of course, because I'm a big fan of Scream and Scream 6, and she's been in a lot of really good genre stuff just around like the last couple of years. Of course, earlier this year, she was in Abigail, which I was a huge fan of. And I really need to see that again. But yeah, so she's really making a name for herself in these in this niche of genre movies, in particular like horror and violent horror movies, basically. And then she was also in the Heights, so there's that too. But I like this run of movies that she's been doing. So Scream, Scream 6, Your Monster, Abigail, like these are all like interesting choices, I think, in terms of genre movies and just kind of like these niche movies here. And Your Monster is really no different from those in terms of it being this interesting like horror, romance, comedy spin, somewhat on Beauty and the Beast, but not really. This is more about her anger and her, like the monster within her being personified as this monster in her closet. So there's a lot of stuff that kind of goes into that. And I feel like that demonstration, the demonstration of that and where that leads, like the idea of the monster being kind of a reflection of herself and her inner rage, that is handled really well at the end. I will say that the movie lands at a point where it has a very satisfactory ending that is really interesting and pretty satisfying. But everything leading up to that just kind of feels a little bit like it's not quite clear what exactly it wants to do or what it's attempting to do. Because when it leads up to that point, like it kind of recontextualizes some things and recontextualizes just the nature of what's been going on for the last hour and a half. And not in a very clear way. It's not really something that makes a lot of sense when you kind of pick it apart piece by piece, because one of the big strengths of the movie is this chemistry between the monster and Laura, played by Melissa Barrera and Tommy Dewey. They have this really good rapport, this really good back and forth. There's some kind of heightened comedy elements in it. So to kind of backtrack a little bit and talk a little bit about the plot in a non-spoiler fashion, Laura, as a character, the movie opens with her in treatment for cancer, and she is in a relationship with this guy, Jacob, played by Edmund Donovan. And the opening credits show that he breaks up with her as she is in treatment for cancer. And then from there, she spirals into this just pit of depression and despair. And then the monster that lives in her house she moves back into her childhood home. And the monster that lives in the closet comes out and kind of, basically the first act has this pretty charming and heightened montage segment of them living together and being kind of adversaries at living together, because the monster has lived there for his whole life and he wants her to be gone because she's suddenly invading his personal space. So there's some fun hijinks here and there, and it's a fun like meet cute moment for the characters. And then it just kind of evolves into romance, which is fine. That's totally fine. It's in keeping with, you know, the tone of the movie from the outset. But then when we get into kind of the middle portion of the movie, Laura is working her way into getting into the production of a Broadway musical that her ex Jacob is directing, and there's a lot of history there, and she has ownership. She feels she has ownership over the musical, and he is trying to cut her out. So there's a lot of like kind of dramatic conflict there between those two, and a lot of stuff that kind of plays into to Laura's ongoing sort of despair and anguish of being just in a helpless place, because she doesn't have a lot of friends. She doesn't have a lot of people there in her corner to help her work through this pain of losing this long-term relationship and potentially losing this creative outlet that she worked with him to cultivate and create. And so there's a lot of really interesting dynamics at play there, but a lot of the movie is just built on this kind of experience or this tone of heightened heightened realism, or maybe not heightened realism, but heightened fantasy, basically, because there's a monster in the movie. And while their chemistry is really good, and I like the arc of that relationship as it pertains to the two of them kind of having their meet cute, they're kind of, to borrow something from book talk, like their enemies to lovers kind of track plot thread throughout the movie. That's very satisfying and compelling. But then when we get deeper into the movie, there's a lot of kind of back and forth about like what she wants in terms of what she wants out of this relationship with the monster and what she wants out of this creative outlet with the musical. And it kind of all comes to a head in the third act, obviously. And there's a lot of like changeover and a lot of, there's at least one thing that kind of caught me by surprise. I usually kind of am right on the money with this kind of thing, but there's like this kind of surprise at the end toward the end where I'm like, oh, I actually didn't see that coming. The movie just drew me into this one element of the plot, and I just went with it, and it ended up turning it on its ear, and I was pretty satisfied by that. I was pretty surprised by that, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And that all kind of leads to that final act where it is this kind of double-edged sword. I do really like the idea that is being presented in the final moments of this movie, that I'm not going to give away anything that happens, but basically Laura is brought into this, or she is bringing forward this, power that she has within her. Not like physical power or anything like that. She's just reclaiming her power as a woman in this story, and the creative force within this play that she's in. And there's some interesting genre elements to that as well, but it just kind of seems a little bit like this ending was a little bit different than what the rest of the movie was building toward. Because I was very much invested in this idea of this like relationship bond between Laura and the monster. And it's still there. It's still present, but in a different way toward the end of the movie that I feel like is maybe just changing a little bit too much about that dynamic, without resolving that romantic tension, or like that ran throughout the movie, that I found was really compelling and really good. Even though it is pretty much, it's kind of cookie cutter. It's basically taking any existing like romantic comedy plot thread that you have with two characters meeting and falling in love. It follows that template to the T, but it is just presented in this fantasy horror disguise. And there also isn't a lot of depth to the monster himself, even though like the character and the performer Tommy Dewey does a great job of being this charismatic persona and this compassionate person who is in Laura's corner, and gets hurt along the way as well. But he is also like he has Laura's best interest in mind, at the forefront of his mind at all times. And it just feels a little bit like you have this heightened kind of otherworldly presence of this monster. He is a monster. It's not like a boy was changed into a monster, and it's not like that kind of Beauty and the Beast sort of thing where he's actually like a human being and he tries to get his humanity back or anything. It's nothing like that. He's just a monster in the closet. Like he is the monster that she saw as a kid in her closet and throughout her life. There is one point in the movie where like it is made very clear that like they're about the same age. So it's not like any gross, like elderly monster who's been in this child's closet for his whole life, for like centuries or anything. They are kind of equally aged, characters. So there is that, but, there isn't a lot of background. There isn't a lot of interesting elements to his character himself. He's just kind of basically just someone who has been interested and been there for Laura throughout her life. And when they reconnect, when she moves back in, it's just more of like, animosity toward her for invading his space because he's lived there in a mostly vacant place for years. And he's just trying to reclaim his territory. There's a contentious element to that softens up into a romantic kind of springing of a relationship. but there's nothing really about him. Like, there's nothing about like who this person is, who this monster is, why, like what his backstory as a monster. It's just like he's just a monster. And like that ties in with the last act pretty well, or well enough. But I just kind of wish that there was a little bit more exploration of that, since there's such an emphasis on the charming, charismatic, and compassionate element of the monster in regards to Laura. But there's not much depth to him as a character. And again, that does tie into the movie. I do understand the reasons behind that, and the reasons that has to be a thing, basically, for that third act, for the finale of the movie to kind of play off and play out the way that it does. But I just kind of felt like it just was missing something. That relationship itself was missing something, and that was the context of who the monster is. Because we've got a wealth of backstory, a wealth of information about Laura in regards to her medical history, of course, and her relationship with Jacob previous to the events of this film. But also, like, that ties into her creative outlets, her creative, like, voice, her creative, like, goals and wishes and achievements and dreams. Like, there's stuff that's packaged in there in this movie, and then the monster is just a monster. It just feels like a little bit lopsided in terms of making us care about these two characters. So when they have that inevitable falling out, like I said, this is following the track of a romantic comedy pretty closely. It just kind of seems like a little bit loose, or a little bit empty in terms of what it means for the monster, what it means for Laura, and how they can eventually reconnect toward the end of the movie. So I don't know. It just seemed a little bit off kilter for me, but I understand that the movie isn't necessarily about that. It is more about Laura. Like, Laura as the central character is the centerpiece of the movie. She is the person who has this experience and is having this heartbreak and having this existential crisis as she's dealing with the drama of her ex and the drama of trying to reclaim her spot in this creative endeavor on this Broadway musical that's her dream, while also dealing with the after effects of having surgery for cancer treatment, and losing a lot of people along the way, in terms of people that or at least not having like a strong bedrock for support, a strong support system, and dealing with the ramifications of that. So there's a ton of stuff for Laura as a character for the audience to kind of just latch onto and really care for that character. And to the movie's credit, it does, like, the movie does a great job of exploring that. It just feels a little bit, like I said, one-sided, because the monster isn't really that developed or anything, and there's not a lot of context for his emotions in it. But again, that also plays into the end of the movie, so it's a little bit of a tough narrative egg to crack. But all that being said, I still think there was something a little bit off about Melissa Barrera's performance as she's playing this character who is dealing with all of this trauma, this drama, this conflict, all of these things that are happening all at once. Because the beginning of the movie really plays up this kind of heightened comedy aspect to it, this like comedic aspect to it, where she is like, she's wailing into tissues and being like kind of over the top dramatic, which is fine in terms of being like a comedy thing. Like, if this was like just playing it as a straight comedy and that's the tone that the movie was going for throughout the movie, that's fine. But when you're dealing with a character who is going through like stuff as serious as cancer treatments and like loss of people around her and loss of companionship, friendships, like being very tarnished and everything. Like, when you kind of have all those things together, it kind of seems like a little bit of, it seems like a little bit of an identity crisis in the tone of the movie, where the movie wants us to kind of play along with Laura being this kind of overly dramatic, crying person on screen, like, cause she's like wailing, like very much dramatic. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, she's dealing with a lot of stuff. Like, why are we portraying this as something that's like a screaming, like angry fit, when it's not more like a dramatic situation that she's going through? So I don't know. It just seemed a little bit strange to me. There are some interesting elements, like in terms of the musical production, the Broadway musical that's in the movie. There's some fun, like behind the scenes of the rehearsal scenes in this movie that are pretty fun. There's one character, I didn't write down his character name on the rundown. I'm gonna probably butcher his name, but it's Ikechukwu Ufamado, who played Don, who I recognized him from somewhere throughout this entire movie, and it wasn't until the end credits, after I looked it up, that he played the titular Inspector Ike in the movie Inspector Ike in 2020, which I loved. That is such a very weird and heightened comedy thing, kind of similar in tone to what the beginning of Your Monster is kind of going for, but it's much more heightened than that. So I recommend checking out Inspector Ike if you can find it. I think it's available digitally, but I loved it. I think in 2020, and this is skewed because it's 2020, but in 2020, I think I initially rated it 5 stars because it's just such a weird, oddball, off the wall comedy that's a lot of fun. So it's interesting that he is in this movie as this character. He's like a stagehand or assistant to the director of the production. I'm not sure what his role in the production of the musical within the movie is, but he has these like weird, like non sequitur moments where he's like, after when they meet for the first table read of the play and the cast is all together, the crew's all together, and then the director, Jacob, kind of introduces everyone, or introduces the star of the musical. Everyone claps, and then Don just keeps clapping for like way too long. Like it's way too long, and it just lives there, and it's really funny because it's such an oddball moment. And he has numerous moments like that, just like these weird like non sequitur dialogue scenes that I think really kind of support that goofy offbeat comedy tone that's present in the beginning of the movie. But again, we're dealing with such kind of serious trauma and serious drama in the movie that it kind of just seems like it didn't quite, the overall tone, while some of that comedy does work really well, the overall tone of it didn't really fit well with what I think the movie was going for, especially at the end, because it doesn't really connect that well with the end of the movie. Like that tone, like there's a much darker tone to the end of the movie that I found really interesting, but it also feels like it belongs in an entirely different movie altogether. So with that kind of disjointed kind of tone, I couldn't really latch on to Your Monster. I couldn't really get into it as deeply as I would have liked to, but I ended up rating it 2.5 stars, which might seem kind of harsh, but it is that 2.5 out of 5. That's right down the middle. So I do appreciate what this movie was going for. But I do feel like it could have explored the topic that it was dealing with and the storyline that it was telling. I think it could have explored it a little bit better than what we got. It's also interesting that I watched this just off the heels of watching Off the Record, a very similar movie at Heartland. If you guys listened to my interview with Kirsten Foe, I loved that movie. And that movie is a romantic drama about an LA musician who falls in love with a rock star who is a manipulative abuser, and basically works to just destroy her life, essentially. Your Monster and Off the Record share a lot of similarities in the way of being about young women who are in a creative partnership or in a creative relationship that is supposed to foster their creativity, but is stifled by the partner that they're with, being, abusive or horrifying to them or mistreating them at the expense of their creativity. Off the Record handles that much, much better with so much more nuance than Your Monster does. But Your Monster is kind of the other side of the coin. It's this like genre piece that ends on a note of it ends on a twisted note of reclaiming power, but in a way that it feels more feels more, I don't know if I would say crowd pleasing, but it feels more in terms of like wish fulfillment than it does earnest kind of resolution of that kind of abusive behavior, like the ending of Off the Record explored, which again, just to throw out there, because I really enjoyed my conversation with Kirsten Foe, and I really want people to see the movie. Off the Record comes out digitally on February 14th, so check that out. But to get back to Your Monster, I think overall it's solid. Like I said, 2.5 stars out of 5. That's right down the middle. I had a fine enough time with this movie, aside from the panic attack I had in the theater a couple of days before I actually watched it proper. But even though I feel like I did have some kind of issues, I guess, with Melissa Barrera's performance, or at least her getting to the point where we can like finding a way into that character. I still really respect her as an actor, and I think that she's been taking some very interesting roles in terms of genre space and horror, especially, because there are this movie, make no mistake, this movie is not a horror movie. This is a romantic comedy with horror kind of leanings here and there. There are a couple of like horror scenes, but for the most part, this is a kind of romantic comedy, relationship drama story, all told. But the whole vibe of it, the aesthetic that is present throughout it is pretty good. It's pretty good. It has some good kind of like autumnal or horror leaning kind of aesthetics and vibes to it. So there is that. So it is worthy of maybe seeing on Halloween. So tonight, if you guys want to. So if you're listening to this the day that it comes out. But yeah, I think that is just about all that I have to say about Your Monster. Once again, it's in theaters. It was released on October 25th. It is in theaters now. I rated it 2.5 stars on Letterboxd. And that's it for the secondary review of this episode of the Obsessive Viewer Podcast. And to kind of wind down this week's episode of the show, I'm going to do a solo potpourri segment. So if this is your first time listening to the Obsessive Viewer, potpourri is a section of the podcast where we kind of wind down and close out the episode with some thoughts about, kind of rapid fire thoughts about movies or shows we've seen recently, things we're looking forward to, whatever we want, as long as it smells good. And since I am the only one here, I'm going to share some movies that I've watched and some thoughts on some movies I've watched recently. So I say this with a caveat that in September, my mother passed away, and I had obviously taken some time off from podcasting. And I had some episodes kind of planned out for that. And obviously, I wasn't in any condition to talk about movies or pay any attention to doing the podcast. So obviously I took some time off. And as such, there are certain movies that I watched that I didn't get a chance to talk about on the podcast. And now that I am in a better mental state, I can kind of go through some of the movies that I've watched recently that I kind of watched while on my, I mean, I guess there's no other way to describe it, my bereavement time from the podcast. So some of these movies were going to be, or at least a couple of the movies on my list were, one or two of the movies on my list were going to be full episode reviews, full review movies. But unfortunately, they didn't get to that because of the time off that I had. Actually, I don't know. I don't know where we'll go with this. So I'm just going to talk about a few of these movies, and then maybe next time I have a solo episode, which might be next week, actually. I might do the rest of them there. So the first one I want to talk about is on VOD right now. It's available to buy on Vudu or Fandango at home if you're nasty. And last I checked, it was $12.99. It could be more, could be less, but it was released on October 1st, 2024. It's Another Happy Day. I talked about it previously on the podcast as a movie that I was anticipating because the star of the movie, Lauren Lapkus, is a comedian that I'm a big fan of. The premise of Another Happy Day is this new mom feels truly terrible at taking care of her newborn. As she stumbles through her days, on her desperate search for a friend, she tumbles into the unlikely bond of an estranged aunt-in-law she never knew. The writer and director for this movie was Nora Pfeiffer. And the cast includes the aforementioned Lauren Lapkus, Carrie Coon, Tim Kazurinski, Francis Guinan, Mike Castle, and Nora Pfeiffer. So this is a postpartum depression, independent comedy, dramedy movie. It's about this connection that forms between this woman and her estranged aunt-in-law. And it's more about the character of Joanna, played by Lauren Lapkus, kind of navigating the world of being a new mother to a newborn child, and trying to figure out like where she is in life now and where she's going in life now. Like if she's going to go back to work, what she's going to go back to work to. And she's realizing that it's a lot harder to navigate this new life that she has. And as a byproduct of that, or because of the postpartum depression that she feels, she has a hard time navigating that. And she has a hard time keeping up interpersonal relationships and friendships. And there's a lot of just drama and kind of just conflict that arises from her day-to-day life as she's trying to figure out what it's like how to be a new mother. And then when she strikes up the friendship with her aunt-in-law, she kind of becomes this more like she kind of finds herself a little bit more, but also kind of spirals into that kind of just disconnected life that she's kind of like, it's kind of drawing her into this kind of lethargic lifestyle. And it's really interesting. And I really like Lauren Lapkus's performance in this movie, because obviously she does a great job at the comedic bits, because there are some very good comedic bits, but there's also a lot of drama there. There's a lot of kind of deep-seated drama in it, and a lot of like processing, like changing, like a change in lifestyle, and a change in like the relationship that she has with her husband, or the relationship she has with her friends, and the navigating this different world that she finds herself in. And I really like that. I really enjoyed this. And I wrote on Letterboxd, I'm not sure how many likes I got, but I wrote on Letterboxd that filmmaker Nora Pfeiffer brings the film together with a lot of flair. I was really taken by the way she captured the disorientation Joanna felt from sleep deprivation, and the way the dream sequences played out were really immersive. That I agree with still to this day. So I enjoyed Another Happy Day. I really enjoyed it. I think it's a really good indie dramedy. If you're into independent film and independent dramas that have a lot to say about certain experiences, in this case postpartum depression, I highly recommend Another Happy Day. It's really, really solid. Next up for my solo potpourri is My Old Ass. Megan Park wrote and directed the movie. It is, according to IMDb, a mushroom trip brings free-spirited Elliot face-to-face with her 39-year-old self, but when Elliot's old ass delivers warnings to her younger self, Elliot realizes she has to rethink everything about her family, life, and love. I rated this 4 stars. It is going to be on Amazon Prime as of November 7th. It's going to have an exclusive streaming premiere on Amazon Prime on November 7th. It previously had a theatrical run. The movie stars Maisie Stella, Aubrey Plaza, Percy Hines White, Maddie Ziegler, Karis Brooks, Maria Dizia, and Elaine Goulam. This is a movie tailor-made for me. It's a coming-of-age drama. It's a coming-of-age story, coming-of-age comedy with a supernatural / science fiction concept, kind of bending it in a unique direction. And I really, really liked that. I really liked that about this movie, and I think it is a really strong kind of drama about this, about a coming-of-age drama, basically. And it's an interesting pivot from Megan Park's previous movie, which was The Fallout with Jenna Ortega being a teenager who survives a school shooting and dealing with the fallout of that and the trauma of that, the PTSD of that. Here in My Old Ass, this is such an interesting way to tell this coming of age story, by having this mushroom trip bring about a vision of 39-year-old Elliot and them having this rapport. Because like Aubrey Plaza isn't in this movie a whole lot, but when she is in this movie, it's very like important to the plot and important to the story, and played incredibly well, because you have this back and forth between her and Maisie Stella playing the present day Elliot that is just like, it's soaked in this level of just like familiarity between the two of them without really knowing each other, especially Maisie Stella's character, Elliot, not really knowing older Elliot necessarily. But having that level of just like comfort between these two characters as they're kind of navigating this bizarre situation that they find themselves in is really, really strong, because you have the mistrust of Elliot and the just kind of panicked mistrust of Elliot at first, coupled with this like very kind of reserved and not very forthcoming version of her in the future, 39 years old, by Aubrey Plaza. And there's a lot of fun like dialogue sprinkled in here. Like Aubrey Plaza's character has a lot of little bits and pieces about like just future stuff that's just like, it's alarming future kind of conversation, but it's like stuff that's like, oh, I need to make it back to the camp where before the aliens invade, or some stuff like that, some things similar to that. And I thought that was very charming and very entertaining. But the what I really appreciate about My Old Ass is that it doesn't the concept, the sci-fi concept, the kind of supernatural concept that happens in it, the fantastic concept of it, isn't something that makes or breaks the movie. It's not something that is the defining quality of the movie. Rather, it's Elliot in present day navigating a lot of changes in her life, and like her attraction to a boy who Aubrey Plaza like specifically told her not to go after and to stay away from. Her hooking up with a girl in town before the summer before going away to college and everything, and kind of just wrestling with her identity, her sexual identity. She thought of herself as a lesbian, but then she's getting more and more attracted to this guy, Chad, and she's kind of wrestling with like what that means for her identity, her personality, her existence, really, like her sexual identity, really. And the movie does such a great job of kind of demonstrating that and navigating that disconnected way that the teenager at the center of the movie is experiencing this. And it's not just like romance changes, it's changes within her family, changes within everything that she knows about her family and has grown up with her family suddenly changing, relationship dynamics with her sibling, and like just a lot of really interesting stuff that is done with such a deft hand for the drama and the comedy of it as well. So I really liked My Old Ass. It comes at a time where like this year has a treasure trove of really good coming of age comedies. Like we've got My Old Ass, Dee Dee, which I loved. I saw the TV Glow, which is still like my movie of the year right now. We'll see where it is in January. And then the 4:30 movie, that was a big champion of. So there's a really good mix of interesting and eclectic coming of age stories in 2024 movies. And My Old Ass is worthy of that kind of Mount Rushmore of 2024 coming of age movies. And once again, My Old Ass is going to be streaming on Amazon Prime on November 7th. Check it out and let me know what you think. And then I think to wind down or to round out this potpourri section in this episode of The Obsessive Viewer, I'm going to talk briefly about Wolves, the John Watts movie on Apple TV Plus. It came out on Apple TV Plus on September 27th, 2024. The premise is two rival fixers cross paths when they're both called in to help cover up a prominent New York official's misstep. Over one explosive night, they'll have to set aside their petty grievances and their egos to finish the job. Writer and director for this movie was John Watts, who previously did the Spider-Man trilogy for Marvel Studios. And the cast includes Amy Ryan, Austin Abrams, George Clooney, Brad Pitt, and Donut McGonigal. There we go. And this movie didn't work for me. I rated it 2 stars. I really didn't like it. The star power of George Clooney and Brad Pitt is wasted almost entirely. They are obviously they're movie stars and they're playing characters that are at each other's throats. They're at odds with each other. But the chemistry on this screen, like, is just empty. Absolutely empty. Like, this movie is just such a drag. Like, there's not a lot of energy to it. Like, the back and forth between George Clooney and Brad Pitt, where they're sniping at each other in terms of quippy banter, just falls so incredibly flat. And like, there's just so, like, there's a noticeable and intentional, I presume, level of just like no energy at all from them in this movie. Throughout the movie, they get on each other's nerves and they're trying to provoke each other and trying to get like in each other's faces, not even necessarily in each other's faces, but trying to undermine each other and just kind of playing this, playing the situation up as like it freaking feels like they're just sleepwalking through it. It honestly feels like they're sleepwalking through it, and that there's nothing redeemable about it in terms of just the energy and the I don't know. It didn't feel like there was anything going forward. And I know that I derided Letterboxd, the kind of shit posting on Letterboxd earlier in this episode, but I will say that there was there was a really good Letterboxd review blurb that I can't really find now, which is probably, I don't know, but maybe it wasn't even a Letterboxd review. But basically it said, look up the budget of this movie and tell me that this isn't a money laundering scheme. Because it just feels that way. And like, that stuck with me. I can't attribute who said that because it might not be actually on Letterboxd now that I'm looking at it. But anyway, that's the vibe that this movie gives off. That this just feels like a completely inert and uninteresting like movie. Like, it's not even like anyone feels like interested in the movie at all. It just seems like, again, everyone's kind of sleepwalking through it. We get these little bits and pieces throughout it that hint at like the bigger world around them of the underground, but it's nothing like too substantial or too interesting really, because it's all kind of just like little bits and pieces, like, oh, they have a history with one guy and that one guy ends up in this one place, so then now they have a conflict there. It's like very much just plot driven contrivances here and there. I wrote on Letterboxd that the story wasn't very strong either. The pair rattle off theories throughout the movie as to why they both showed up at the same job. And frankly, every scenario they run through probably would have made for a slightly more entertaining movie. And yes, that is absolutely true, because every single time the movie kind of stops for them to do like this back and forth of like, oh, well, maybe we were called to the same place because of this reason and this reason. And then they just like pitch an elaborate plot that would have been a much more interesting plot for a different movie. And then the movie resumes with them just walking through and going through the paces. And I don't know, it really, really sucked. It really sucked. I don't know. It was really lame. And by the end of the movie, I'm not even going to say I can sort of respect the ending, because it's not, it's derivative. The ending is an homage to another, I guess, buddy movie that's far better, like a far, far, far better movie, from decades ago. And it just doesn't feel right here because I didn't care about the characters. I didn't care about like the mystery surrounding them or anything like that. It just was just a very, very heavy dud of a movie that did not work for me. So that's Wolves. I rated it 2 stars on Letterboxd. It is streaming on Apple TV Plus, and that will just about do it for this episode of the Obsessive Viewer podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you thought of these reviews and everything that I've said for the last however long this episode has been going. Thank you once again this week to Michael Hussein and Kirsten Foe for lending me their time and chatting with me about their films from Heartland Film Festival, Off the Record, and The Waiting Game. If you haven't listened to those episodes, go check them out and listen to my reviews and follow their films, follow their careers, see where they're going. And when you have a chance to see the movies, definitely check them out because I really enjoyed both of them and really, really want to champion them as much as I can because I want people to see them. Also, video versions of those interviews are up on YouTube. So go ahead and subscribe on YouTube as well and check those out. So that's it for this week's episode of The Obsessive Viewer. As always, thank you so much for listening, and make sure to follow the show on social media and subscribe to the podcast on your preferred podcast app. Also, check out Obsessive Viewer Podcast's other shows, Tower Junkies, a Stephen King podcast hosted by Tiny and myself, and Anthology, the Twilight Zone and classic sci-fi podcast hosted by me. Next week on the show, I am planning on reviewing Here and We Live in Time. That'll be on Thursday. And then on the 11th, I should have a bonus episode reviewing It Ends With Us with special guest Kim C. from the Year of Underrated Stephen King. A long gestating episode that we're finally going to do. I'm excited. So until then, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week. And now, enjoy this short clip from a recent Patreon-exclusive episode. For the full episode and more Patreon-exclusive content, sign up at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. It just feels like, especially in 2024, when like these kinds of things have been like well broadcast as being something that, you know, maybe we as a like maybe filmmakers, maybe storytellers should be more conscious of, for that to appear still as if this was a movie made in the 90s. And maybe that's the intention, but it really doesn't come across that way. Thank you for listening to the Obsessive Viewer podcast. This episode was produced and edited by me, Matt Hurt. If you have feedback, thoughts on our episodes, or just want to connect, you can email me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. For more information on this show, including a full archive of our episodes and show notes, visit obsessiveviewer.com. And if you enjoyed the show, please give us a follow on social media and subscribe to us on your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. Also, consider rating and reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Audible to help increase our visibility and grow our community. If you want to support the show and get early access to new episodes, as well as a steady stream of exclusive episodes, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. For information on more podcasts presented by obsessiveviewer.com, visit obsessiveviewer.com/podcasts. Our theme song is A Little Mad Sometimes by As Good As It Gets. For more of their music, check them out on Spotify and at asgoodasitgetsmusic.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Get up to 2 months of free podcasting service with Libsyn. Check out the show notes for your promo code to get started podcasting today.
Okay, it's official. We are very much in the final sprint to Election Day. And face it, between debates, polling releases, even court appearances, it can feel exhausting, even impossible to keep up with. I'm Brad Milkey. I'm the host of Start Here, the daily podcast from ABC News. And every morning, my team and I get you caught up on the day's news in a quick, straightforward way that's easy to understand, with just enough context so you can listen, get it, and go on with your day. So, kickstart your morning. Start smart with Start Here and ABC News, because staying informed shouldn't feel overwhelming.